Hi guys, and welcome to All Things English. Today's lesson is all about the future perfect tense. Knowing exactly how and when to use this tense will make you more articulate when it comes to talking about the future. It'll help you relay information about the future clearly, accurately, and precisely. And this, of course, will benefit your overall fluency. So let's get right to it. How and when do we use the future perfect tense? If we look closer at the name of this verb tense, it actually tells us how to use it. Future. The verb tense refers to an action or state that'll happen in the future. Perfect. Generally speaking, perfect verb tenses refer to completed actions or states. While the phrase completed action or state may seem odd when referring to the future, because obviously if something is completed, then it's finished, or has happened, or is in the past. This is the reason why the future perfect tense is said to describe the past in the future. Because when we use this tense, we project ourselves forward into the future and look back at an action that'll be completed in the future as well. So, taking all this into account, the future perfect tense refers to an action or state that'll be completed at some point in the future before another point in time or event in the future. For example, try to imagine that it's a long weekend and you're on your way to the airport to catch the 9 a.m. flight to Mexico for the holidays. Then suddenly, you find yourself stuck in a traffic jam. You then check your watch and realize that it's 8:45, and you might not make it on time for your flight. At this point, you'd probably be thinking, at this rate, when I get to the airport, the plane will have already left. Let's take a look at the timeline to make things clear. This sentence tells us that, at present, you're on your way to the airport to catch the 9 a.m. flight to Mexico for the long weekend. But because unfortunately, you now find yourself stuck in heavy traffic, your estimate is that you'll be arriving at the airport at this point in the future, and therefore will miss your flight, which would already have left by then. Once again, this is the reason why the future perfect tense is said to describe the past in the future. Because if you look closely at the table, the speaker is basically projecting himself forward into the future and is estimating that when he arrives at this point in the future, he'll be looking back at another future action that'll be completed before that. Okay, so now, how do we form the future perfect tense? The formula for the future perfect tense is pretty simple and easy to remember. Just take the subject plus the first auxiliary verb, will, plus the second auxiliary verb, have, plus past participle. And it doesn't matter if the subject is singular or plural, the formula doesn't change. For negative sentences, we insert not between the first and second auxiliary verbs. So for example, he will have left becomes he will not have left. They will have performed becomes they will not have performed. To form questions, we exchange the subject and the first auxiliary verb. So for example, we will have gone becomes will we have gone? You will have eaten becomes will you have eaten? For negative questions, I've made a separate table because it's a little bit tricky. Usually, for the negative questions, the structure is auxiliary verb plus subject plus not plus second auxiliary verb plus main verb. So for example, will we not have gone? Or will we not have gone by then? Will you not have eaten? Or will you not have eaten by 7 p.m.? Now, the structure is correct, but usually, as a native speaker, I would just use the contraction won't. We just take the first auxiliary verb, will, and not, and we contract it into won't and follow the rest of the structure. So it becomes won't we have gone, or won't we have gone by then, or won't you have eaten by 7 p.m.? Now, the tricky thing here is I know it says won't you have eaten, but we can't uncontract the won't and say will not you have eaten by the time we arrive? This is wrong. The correct way is to use the contraction and the rest of the structure. Contractions with the future perfect tense. When we use the future perfect, especially in speaking, we often contract the subject and the first auxiliary verb. We also do this in informal writing, for example, like text messaging or emails. So I will becomes I'll, you will becomes you'll, and so on. In negative sentences, we may contract the auxiliary verb will and the word not, and this becomes the contraction won't, like we discussed in the previous slide. Since the future perfect tense should always have a time frame, here are some examples of the most commonly used phrases to indicate that time frame. Before, by the time, by 8 o'clock, by October, by then, by the end of, when, after. Okay, now it's time for another example. Jason, the star player of his high school's football team, has finally graduated high school and has been accepted at a top university on a football scholarship. Right now, he's already daydreaming of what he'll have accomplished by the time he finishes college. By the time I finish college, I'll have trained with the best coaches and have played with the best players in the league. I'll have mastered all the skills I need to be a successful professional player. So once again, let's take a look at the timeline to make things clear. This sentence tells us that Jason will graduate college at this point in the future. Let's say 4 years from now. So between the time he starts classes and the time he graduates 4 years from now, he'll train with the best coaches and play with the best players at some point or points between these two periods. Could be at this point, could be at this point, or at this point. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that it'll happen and be completed by the time he graduates, thereby giving him the skills he needs to be a successful pro football player. We also use the future perfect to describe how long an action will occur before a certain point in time in the future. For example, they will have been married for 50 years by the time I'm 80 years old. This sentence tells us that they got married at some point in the past. Could be here, or they might even get married at some point in the future, maybe here. It doesn't really matter when. What matters is that by the time I'm 80 years old, they'll already be married and their marriage will have lasted for 50 years. Let's take a look at another example. I'll have saved enough money to be comfortable by the time I retire. This sentence tells us that on the day I retire, let's say 30 years from now, I'll have an amount of money in the bank that'll allow me to live comfortably throughout my retirement years. And that's because I started saving money at an earlier point. Could be here, could be here, could even be here. It doesn't matter when I started saving the money. What matters is that by the time I retire, the action of saving is completed and I'll have saved enough. Okay, moving on. There are a couple of things to take note of when using the future perfect tense. The future perfect tense is only used for actions that'll be complete before a specified point in the future. So in other words, the action that you're talking about must have a deadline. So for example, you can't say, I will have traveled to Hawaii, because this statement on its own is a subordinate dependent clause. To make it simple, it's an incomplete sentence that doesn't make sense. So instead, you can say, I'll have traveled to Hawaii by the end of the year. Secondly, we only use the future perfect tense to refer to actions or states that'll be completely finished in the future. If an action or state is not finished or is in progress, then we use the future perfect continuous tense. You can see an example of this in these sentences. By sunset, I'll have done my homework, meaning you will be done working on your homework by sunset. By sunset, I'll have been doing my homework for 2 hours. This is the future perfect continuous tense. And this means that when the sun sets, you'll have finished 2 hours of work, but you'll still continue to work after that as well. Okay, guys, I made a short quiz that you should do to make sure that you've understood the lesson. Good luck. All right, guys, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. And more importantly, I hope you learned something new. Feel free to subscribe if you found value in this lesson, and click that like button if you enjoyed this particular lesson. So have a nice day, and I'll see you next time.